are listening to or watching the Filmcast. This is our review of Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I'm going to read the plot summary of this movie from IMDb. The people of Wakanda fight to protect their home from intervening world powers as they mourn the death of King T'Challa. This movie is written by Ryan Coogler and Joe Robert Cole and directed by Ryan Coogler. Devindra Hardware, obviously, Black Panther was a phenomenon, one of the best reviewed, best performing superhero films of all time. I think we all really enjoyed it here on the podcast. And obviously, we're really looking forward to Black Panther 2. Unfortunately, there's been tragic developments with Chadwick Boseman's passing. And so a lot of open questions about what would happen to Black Panther 2 and how they would change the plot. And I do want to acknowledge that there was a story that they had written featuring Chadwick Boseman, and they decided to change the path that they took for this movie. The biggest thing they did, obviously, is incorporating King T'Challa's death into the movie itself, right? And it mirrors Chadwick Boseman's death and how the people involved with the movie were also mourning the passing of their friend. But putting that aside, I am curious, overall, what did you think of Black Panther Wakanda Forever?
I mean, I'm still chewing this movie and still thinking quite a bit about it, but my first reaction was honestly a bit of befuddlement and confusion. I feel like so much of this movie falls prey to the second movie problems that Marvel series tend to have. So I'm thinking Iron Man 2, Guardians 2. We don't talk about Thor 2 because, yeah, that was even more lost in the first movie, but kind of the same issue there. This is a strange movie, because it's dealing with grief. I feel like it begins and ends with grief, and that is such a big portion of like what is happening and what's driving these characters. And it is kind of fascinating to see them basically honor Chadwick Boseman in this movie. Like the movie starts with a funeral, and in my theater, which was filled with like people at one of the first Thursday screenings, people were just like openly crying within 2 minutes of this movie opening because it's celebrating Chadwick. Like his image is everywhere, and it does remind you of like, man, he brought so much to the MCU. He was so fantastic in Black Panther, and he was just taken from us too early. So that moment where I'm just thinking of like the moment where it's not even a huge spoiler. Instead of the like triumphant Marvel logo, going into the movie, after the funeral, it's silence, and it's also images of Chadwick from the MCU, and I feel like that even made me tear up a little too.
It's a emotion. The opening of this movie and the way it pays tribute to Chadwick Boseman is an emotional gut punch.
Yeah.
The way they redo the Marvel Studios logo is really beautiful. Jeff, I know you also had a similar reaction, right?
I did. Yeah. It's beautiful, and
it's really lovely. It's really lovely.
I didn't see it coming. I didn't know. And we're so used to that Marvel logo featuring all the different heroes, and to have it just be him in complete silence, it is.
And it felt like longer. It felt like longer than it usually goes. It felt like
like we were all holding our breath, just like man.
Yeah, it felt like they really like. Took time, like in that logo, just literally in the logo, they took time to like give you an appreciation of the fullness of Boseman's contributions to the MCU. Like, it's not just like, a couple shots from Black Panther. It's like literally like,
it's like a ton of memorable moments. This was our king, and he is.
And
the
other thing that's
here.
so interesting is how the movie doesn't spend a lot of time explaining it. It really doesn't. The line between the actor passing and the character passing is blurred. It is literally like we assume we know, we're acknowledging it. It's a big deal in our universe. It's not like, we're gonna spend half an hour talking about how he passed. It's just he's dead. I'm sorry. It's sad. Everybody's sad, and it feels like the actors themselves in those moments are mourning Chadwick as much as playing the plot. You
can definitely see it in the characters and everything. So I think. That is kind of it. Like, this movie begins with a sense of grief and the sense of loss, and I think it never really leaves that. So that's not. It's tough. Like, I can't say, oh man, this movie wasn't as fun as Black Panther 1, because it wasn't. It doesn't even really have time to be, because these characters are dealing with such a significant death and dealing with like how they deal with their grief and process it. But I think overall too, like it is a weird experience as a movie, because it feels kind of slow. Like, it takes a while to get going. I think there's some great aspects of it. It does highlight some of the best female characters that are in the MCU and really puts them front and center. Letitia Wright, I love as Shuri. Angela Bassett being just herself, being as regal as possible. Like so many people I love. Michaela Cole is in here, and we've talked about her show, and like I love seeing her. Like she basically expressed her love for the franchise, and was able to get herself in there too. So I love seeing that. This movie is also, and I won't dive too deeply into like the plot of the other folks. This movie introduces Namor, a character I've never really had much fondness for, but I think Tenoch Huerta does a really great job of selling this character who is sort of kind of like a similar vibe to Killmonger, except I think more noble in certain respects too, right? Like he is a former god, or basically he is sort of a god, but he's also somebody who's protecting this like small community that's been safe from colonialism and from the terrors of it. And it is an interesting parallel to Wakanda because that is essentially what that secret kingdom actually was, you know? So that part kind of hit me too, because hey, I am from South America. My wife's family is from Puerto Rico. I have family from all over Latin America. So the troubles and like basically the impact of colonialism and what the Spanish did to Mexico, to South America and everything kind of hits hard to me. So seeing Namor basically also we'll talk about some stuff in spoilers, but basically seeing him create the safe space and the safe community for his people to just be themselves and not be overcome by the colonialists, I think is there's something genuinely moving there. We see a bit of that community too, and it feels like seeing Wakanda for the first time. Also kind of feels like what maybe we'll see in Avatar 2 if we see underwater cities or something. Like maybe that's something that could happen in that movie. I found that really fascinating. This movie definitely, it feels like Ryan Coogler, as always, and his co-writer did their homework around the efforts of colonialism and like what that means. There are things in this movie that I found really compelling. Like one of the first things they do is the Queen basically being at a UN tribunal. I guess like at people are asking like, why aren't you sharing your resources? And she's like, why would we? You know, because we can't trust you guys. And it ends up being France who's called out for sending this this tactical team to go trying to steal some vibranium. Also funny that Haiti plays a major role in this movie because France basically doomed Haiti as a country by making them forcing them to pay like millions of dollars worth of debt when Haiti basically freed themselves, when the slaves in Haiti freed themselves and tried to make their own country. So the weight of colonialism is here in this movie. I wish it was maybe explored a little more. And in spoilers, I'll talk about like why I think some of the third act stuff felt kind of weird, because ultimately this movie is about these two oppressed cultures who are kind of like magical. Like it is a miracle these two cultures exist. Ultimately, this movie is about them fighting each other. And I do feel like that is a little weird too for a movie that is so smart about how it's considering world powers and the state of the world today. So yeah, I didn't come away super overjoyed by this movie, but I found a lot of it interesting. I just wish like some of the other parts work better. I think character motivations are all over the place. I don't think any of the action works for me. I think there's a spear fight on a bridge that is like I think well done and looks cool, but it seems like a lot of the focus of this movie had to be basically getting these characters together, working in Namor and his people, and also setting things up for the rest of the MCU. So it does feel like it feels like a bridge movie. It feels like a movie that doesn't really exist on its own because it has to lead into other series happening on Disney Plus and future movies coming too. So it can't really stand on its own either.
Well said, Devindra, and I agree with almost everything you said in terms of
Cool.
your thoughts on Black Panther and Wakanda Forever. I'm curious, Jeff Kanata, as a Marvel zombie from way back, what did you think of Black Panther Wakanda Forever?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say what I thought of Black Panther Wakanda Forever is best summed up in the form of a limerick. There's certainly no replacing Chadwick, so it's amazing. A Black Panther film is still good without him. I just wish it had better pacing.
Ooh.
Okay. All right.
Good.
I agree with a lot of what Devindra said as well. I disagree with the action. I think there are two main action sequences in this movie, and both of them I thought were pretty spectacular. I really enjoyed. I mean, there's one. I mean, they're both involving water, but there's the first one where water plays a really big role. I just thought there were some extremely cool moments. But most of this movie isn't an action movie. And I do think it has major pacing problems. It is trying to do so much, and I think collapses a bit under the weight of that burden because, I feel like this movie would have benefited from being an 8-episode Disney Plus series. Not to take anything away from, not to diminish it anyway, because obviously, these Black Panther films are huge tentpole events, and this movie's crushing it at the box office. But I look at something like Andor, and I recognize Andor for as genius as it is, and as amazing as it is, it wouldn't really work very well as a movie because it needs to have that breadth to expand and set up things. And I think this movie would have benefited from that. I think it is trying to do so many things. I wish we would have had, 6 to 8 hours of episodes that let us explore the Namor and his side and it's doing so much, introducing Ironheart, and like that's a whole other corner of this movie that just all of it feels underserved, and it you're spending these large chunks of time doing so many different things, and the movie feels overlong already, and it just doesn't feel well paced. I found myself getting antsy and not, there's these wonderful, indulgent in a positive way, underwater sequences that are just gorgeous and beautiful. But at a certain point, I'm like, man, I found myself getting fatigued in this movie to a certain extent, just wanting, there's so many threads that it really feels unwieldy. And I think if it was a series, I think that would have been, it could have pulled off better and it would have felt better paced. That said, I do think the movie does some amazing things, and it is extraordinary how, the tragic passing of one actor can completely transform the tapestry of a multi-billion-dollar universe of stories, and the fact that they're willing to go there and do that, I thought that was moving and beautiful. I'm amazed by what they've done with Namor. I mean, obviously, as a comic book fan, very familiar with Namor, a huge part of the Marvel universe in the comics, and a sort of chaotic good character who has grievances, is perturbed, and often battles the good guys. And the reimagining of Namor, which in the comics, they are Atlanteans, right? They're from Atlantis, and the idea that they threw that all out and really reinvented this in a much more interesting way that really has much more to say. Even just from an iconography perspective, it's so much more interesting, and visiting that culture and visiting that undersea land and getting the entire origin story and backstory of how that came to be. It's all fascinating, but it just makes this movie completely overstuffed. And I think that's my biggest problem, is that the pacing is really hard. I found the movie to be too much, too long between big action set pieces, to sort of be a big tentpole movie like this, but so full of such interesting ideas and sequences that are fascinating and well executed that it's certainly not a bad movie, and one I highly recommend. I think it is really good. It just doesn't it's not a home run because it doesn't hold together. It's not greater than the sum of its parts. Like, the sum of its parts are great, but there's too many parts.
It's interesting you say pacing. That's not how I would think about it. It's just there's literally too many things to contain in one 2-hour, 40-minute long movie.
I think about half an hour in, I was like, when is this movie actually going to start? Because it does feel like we got several opening scenes. We got the funeral, we had the UN scene, you have the introduction of the Atlanteans. I forget the name of the actual people.
Talokan, I think they're called.
Talokan,
Talokan, basically fighting Blake. Who's it? Lake Bell? and people, I'm like, I know
Yeah.
her face.
Yeah.
It's very confusing, but
Yeah.
we get that whole introduction too, and that was a really like cool sequence. But it feels like the movie itself took a while to
Yeah.
get started. Yeah,
I'll share some more thoughts on that once we get to spoilers. I'll just say really quickly, uh, agree with virtually everything you guys have said today. I mean, I think it's rare. It's rare that we're so aligned on a movie, but I agree with virtually everything you guys said, and I think that as much as I want to praise some of the things the movie did well, it's worth praising the things the movie didn't do.
sure. Mhm.
And here are some things they could have done that they didn't do. Okay, they could have uh, used some CG version of Chadwick Boseman to make the movie. Right, that is a possibility they could,
or
have done.
even to just do like a bridge, like a 5-minute bridge sequence from the last movie to
Yes.
this movie.
Or
Yes.
keep him in the costume or something. you
Keep
know?
the costume all the time, or they could have replaced the actor who was Chadwick Boseman, like
Right.
who Chadwick Boseman played. They could have replaced T'Challa as an actor.
Yeah, just
They didn't do that.
recast T'Challa.
They could have like just uh they could have integrated Killmonger into this movie in a bigger way, or like basically like have someone external to T'Challa's family like kind of play bigger roles in the movie.
Swoop
right?
in and be the center of the film.
Yeah, exactly. And they didn't choose a lot of those paths, and it is very sort of they could have done the Fast and Furious method where hey, Paul Walker is like off with his family, we're not going to see him again. Like they could have not acknowledged the death, right? Which is like another path they could choose. And I think the path they chose is like, hey, we're all just going to acknowledge it, as you said very eloquently, Jeff. Like we're all going to acknowledge it. And it's very sad, and like we're going to like pay tribute to him, to his passing in the film itself is very lovely and beautiful, and like it's worth watching for that reason alone. Like because this movie does that, if you as a viewer are looking for like some kind of closure to this, because Chadwick Boseman's passing was so sudden and so tragic, like none of us knew. It wasn't like a long drawn out decline. It was like all of a sudden he was gone.
He was
And
working really hard while he was very sick.
Right.
So that's why it feels so sudden. Yeah.
And if you as a viewer, as a consumer of pop culture, are like looking for some kind of closure around that, in my opinion, this movie does help to offer that. Like I'm like yeah, I still have really complicated feelings about Chadwick Boseman's passing, and like watching this is like I feel like I'm amongst a group of people that also love Chadwick Boseman, and like we are witnessing, we are like recognizing the passing together, and it's kind of a way to like have that catharsis in a movie, right? Which is like notable and special. Everything else about the movie, I agree with you guys. Like it was just way too much.
I agree
stuff.
with you too.
It feels like it's like the Iron Man 2, Thor: The Dark World, like the Ironheart stuff. Like this movie tries to do so much. The Ironheart stuff, introducing Namor and their people, introducing a successor to Black Panther, like all these things.
Bringing Julia Louis-Dreyfus into the cinematic universe.
Completely.
Every one of her scenes were awful.
All those scenes didn't have anything to do with this movie. They're all there.
They literally didn't need to be scenes. They literally could have been a phone call. Like it's absolutely bizarre, some of the stuff that happens. So it does feel like Black Panther 1 felt like, oh, this is like a cool movie that happens to be in the MCU, right? Black Panther Wakanda Forever feels like an MCU movie that happens to have Black Panther in it, or feature the Black Panther character, and to its detriment, I would argue. And that's kind of those are my thoughts. It just tries to do too much, and as a result, very little of it lands. But the Chadwick Boseman stuff is really special. And also, I do want to acknowledge that the Namor stuff and the Talokan stuff, from what I can tell, they tried to do it right. They tried to do a good job with it. And my sense is they accomplished that in terms of like, for instance, like the language that they speak, I understand is like an ancient Mayan language still used in parts of Mexico. Like it's not just like the culture is not just window dressing. Like they really tried to dig in and do the work, is my sense.
I really appreciated that too.
Right.
Like,
whether or not like
that.
the character and his people like actually have a meaningful plot in the story, like we can discuss that. But like in terms of like the look, the feel, the depth of the culture, it feels like they really tried to reach deep in that regard. And so that is worth acknowledging. Right?
There's a specificity there that I think is very. You could have just made up something. You could have had a made up alien language, but no, it is rooted in actual culture. And just thinking about like I don't know how many people think about this, but the Spanish conquering of the Americas was an absolute genocide. Like the
Hmm.
sheer amount of people that were killed and the cultures that were killed. So to have this idea of like this portion of a culture that could go underwater and just be completely separate from that and be
Yeah.
safe and be its own thing, I thought was really moving too.
It's like a parallel to Wakanda in many ways, right? Like
Yes.
a basically like a people of color untouched by
Yeah.
colonialism.
Mhm.
So anyway, I do want to acknowledge that like it's powerful to see that kind of representation on screen, and I don't want to like minimize that in any way, even as I don't think the movie is that great. So anyway, so those are some messy thoughts about the movie, but let's get into spoilers. So spoilers for Black Panther: Wakanda Forever starting right now. So, Devindra, I read that
Mhm.
this movie from the beginning was supposed to be uh, Black Panther, played by Chadwick Boseman, going up against one of his greatest rivals in the comics, Namor, right?
Yep.
But it sounds like I had the same reaction to you watching this movie: is why aren't you guys teaming up and fighting the colonizers? Like,
Yes. I
and
feel like we're having the wrong conversation here,
yeah,
guys.
and
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
like that's certainly
Mhm.
part of the movie, right? I think
Mhm.
that's like part
Yep.
of the message of the movie is like you should not be divided. Like
Mhm.
people, these civilizations should not be divided by their differences, and they should unite, and they have more in common than they have. You know, there's more that binds them together than separates. Like I get that that's part of the theme of the movie, but just as a viewer who wants the
Mhm.
best for these peoples, it's
Just want you all
painful
to
to
get
watch them go.
along.
It's like stop fighting each other, guys. Like
The
there's a
whole
much greater
finale is them killing each other. I'm
yeah, and
like,
it's
"Guys,
like
you don't have many people.
yeah,
You need to
like
stop
guys,
this."
there's other people you could be fighting against that I think would
Yeah.
be much more satisfying from a
Go
plot
out there and
perspective.
make France repay Haiti for the sheer tonnage of money they were forced to pay. Like, do
Exactly,
that. That's
exactly.
a
like
movie.
that's what
But I
you
think
want to
that's the
see.
point.
It's what you want to
Isn't
see.
that the
Yes,
point? That's the point.
yes, yeah.
That is the point.
It's the point. Do we need a whole movie to make that point? You know, to be deep, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's just a bummer to see. Like I'm
Mhm.
not saying the movie wasn't purposeful in it. It's just like
Mhm.
I wish
I
I wanted
yeah.
better for these two civilizations. You
I
know.
could totally see like what Namor like his thinking too, because he's basically fueled by rage and the pure like power to defend his people. Like that is the most important thing at all costs. And yeah, logic often doesn't come into it. And I will say, Huerta, oh man, like just he owns every scene.
He's
And
awesome. He's awesome.
I
Yeah.
think by the definition of that character too is like, oh man, so you basically have to be. You remember when Daniel Craig got out of the beach in those speedos? You got to do that for every scene because you
Yeah.
got to be wet, buddy. That's your power. You got to be wet and sexy, and he accomplishes that. Yeah,
Yeah, he's great. He's great in the movie and
and
has an
he makes the
awesome screen
little
presence.
even the little wings work.
Yeah.
They make a sound, you know, and it's. I always thought that aspect of the character was hilarious, and it works here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think the first 30 minutes of this movie were really I like them a lot. Like
Hmm.
because we start with the whole Chadwick Boseman funeral thing, and like that's very powerful. It's
Yeah.
the first 5-10 minutes, arguably the emotional height of the movie. Like it's in the first 5-10 minutes. And then Angela Bassett shows up. She's a force of nature. She's
She's
incredible in this
incredible,
movie.
dude.
Like I honestly wish the movie had been about her. Like
I
I
thought it was going to be. I mean,
yes,
I'd stayed away from spoilers, so I hadn't seen Shuri
yeah,
in the suit or
me
any of
neither.
that stuff. So I was like, oh my God, are they making this an Angela Bassett movie? This is
Which would be so
incredible.
amazing.
Yeah.
But then, like at that point, I'm still like, oh, it's going to be about Angela Bassett and like trying to keep her kingdom together in the wake of
Yeah.
T'Challa's death. That's literally where I thought the movie was going. Because I also skipped the trailers like Jeff Kanata, and then of course it just starts splintering wildly in all these different directions, right? So it's like
Yeah.
Ironheart and Namor, and then we have this thing. So the Lake Bell and the sea platform stuff, that was like really good stuff. I thought just like really good, effective like horror filmmaking. I
Yeah.
thought like where it's just like, who are these people? People are jumping into the ocean and they're dying, and then all
Yeah,
of a
dude,
sudden
that
yeah,
whole like evoking the old siren song
yeah,
idea, it's
yeah.
such a neat concept.
Yeah, yeah. So I loved all that stuff. But then of course, then it's like, okay, now we're introduced to Ironheart, and it's like, okay, really, like,
And the movie's like
I
doing this like goofy comedy. We're like
yeah,
off on this comedy adventure with
yeah, with the
Okoye.
yeah,
It's very
and sure, but then it's also like, okay, so they wanna the Namor wants to kill uh Dominique Thorne's character because he's like, he doesn't want them making any more vibranium detectors, I guess, because if they make more vibranium detectors,
They'll find them.
then they can find them. And it's really, really important that Dominique Thorne dies, I guess, because
There's no other outcome here. You can't just have a sit down, be
you
like,
can't have a
hey,
sit down.
go do this. Yeah.
He's basically like Sarah Connor trying to kill Miles Dyson in Terminator 2. He's like, she must be stopped at all costs. And anyway, so. But yeah, it kind of the plot kind of splinters off in these various different directions, and then it really, I'm like, who is the main character at this point? It like becomes Shuri by the end, but it's a bit of a rocky journey to get there, and I think that's a huge part of the problems of the movie. So
I also feel like it is weird to introduce Riri Williams and really not do much with her either. Like she disappears for entire swaths of this movie because she is just a setup character. It's more like, hey, she's here. She's doing Iron Man stuff. Now let's move on with the rest of the movie. And we'll say hello to her in her TV show, which we know is coming soon.
Yeah. And similarly, Michaela Cole, like, I May Destroy You is one of the most brilliant works of TV I've seen in my lifetime. And I was like, oh, cool, Michaela Cole's going to get a big role in this movie. And she does do some badass stuff, but like, she's not really in the movie very much.
She's just one of the team, basically.
Yeah. So there's just a lot going on. How did so Jeff, you liked the ending battle sequence, right? Like you thought that worked for you?
I mean, I think it has some cool stuff. I much prefer the midway battle sequence, the attack on Wakanda.
That's cool. That is cool.
I thought that sequence was amazing. The way they're like, oh, they're coming through the water, and it just it erupts all around them, and the way that it just feels like they're completely overwhelmed by Namor and his team. I thought that sequence was by far the coolest. But I mean, I liked that like Cirque du Soleil rope work stuff. I thought they could have gone farther with that. I wanted to see more acrobatics and like use of that stuff, but I thought the idea was neat, and I thought that whole sequence was pretty cool. And you know that the final showdown, it didn't make much sense to me why. Hey, they defeated Namor. I guess we're all cool now. I thought that was very weird. I'm like, hey, look,
Namor's like,
we
we're friends
fought over there where you couldn't see, but I won. So let's all like stop fighting each other.
Yeah, I would love to see more of the Shuri and Namor throwdown because I thought that was pretty cool. Like the whole plan is like, we're just going to dehydrate this guy, and it turns into a Dragon Ball Z fight, basically, like in a desert planet, them throwing each other against rocks, and Shuri's ultimate. I do feel like maybe it's a bit of a cop-out what this movie does, because her thing of just being like Wakanda forever, roast in hell, dude. And like that moment, people cheered in my audience, and we're also like, it's complicated. Do we want her to go down that path? He did kill her mother. Like there are things he did that I think are unforgivable. So it is going to be really interesting to see like what they do with this character, but also maybe just let Shuri kill a dude. Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I want to ask you guys about the ending too. You know, the mid-credit sequence.
I had a funny experience in my screening. This never happens, but at our press screening, someone came out before, a PR representative, and said, "Hey, everybody, thanks for coming. I want you to know, I hope you all stay to the end," which, by the way, in a Marvel film, you don't need to say that. We're going to stay to the end.
Except in this one, it doesn't matter. But
I hope you all stay to the end because there are 3 post-credit scenes.
What?
And we were like, oh, snap. Marvel, snap. 3 post-credit scenes. So that first one comes up, very beautiful. We'll talk about it. But all the press around me, we're sitting in our seat. 2 more coming. What is it going to be? Oh man! Oh, the credits are long. That's okay. Oh, really getting to the end of these credits.
Yeah, really.
Oh boy! Oh, there's that Marvel
to the state
logo.
Of Georgia. Yeah.
2 more scenes after the Marvel logo. Oh, the lights came up and it's over.
Yeah.
What?
I wish that PR person just came out with their phones, being like, "Thanks for being on my TikTok. I just trolled all of you. Maybe you'll stay here for 5 extra minutes." I also stayed there and was surprised.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, you literally, they never tell us there's scenes at the end. They did. And it was like, you lied?
Did you find that person be like, I need those 10 minutes of my life? Yeah, I could have gone.
Come on.
Home.
So I have to confess, the mid-credit scene did not work for me.
Yeah.
And there's many people who found it very moving, and that's cool. But basically, what happens in the mid-credit scene is Shuri goes to Haiti, right, and meets with Nakia. And Nakia reveals, hey, she actually had a secret child with T'Challa, and they've been squirreling him away in Haiti to make sure
Yeah.
he's like untouched by royal life. And that's it's I think it's supposed to be very powerful for Shuri because like her whole family has passed away, right? Like
Yeah.
her mother,
Yeah.
her brother, and so like now she has like some family
Yes.
left. Um, for me, it didn't work for a couple reasons. Number one, because it comes at the end of like a movie that felt very overstuffed, and I wasn't sure who the focus of the movie was supposed to be. But also like the mental contortions that I had to go through to
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
to be like, okay, so she had a kid and didn't tell any, but like,
Mhm.
why didn't she tell any? Like,
And Shuri asks the question I was thinking, like, did the queen know?
yeah, did the
Like,
queen know?
and
Like all
Shuri
this,
asks that specifically.
and
So
it's like, yes,
she
she did. It's like, oh,
okay.
okay, that's weird
And
that
she's
everyone
It's
knew
more
that.
weird now. Yeah, it's got
Yeah.
weirder actually.
It got weirder.
Yeah.
It got weirder, and then like also like I think it's implied that like M'Baku, played by Winston Duke, like also knew like
Mm.
had conversations with T'Challa before he died as well about like what T'Challa would want. So like maybe M'Baku possibly like so like
Mm.
Shuri is the one person who didn't know, you know. So it's just like I was like, oh, like this is not really. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be like a
I
nice
was
like
thinking
ooh.
I
But
was
none
thinking
of
of
it.
you, Jeff, and
Yeah.
your love of baby Superman in Superman Returns.
Well,
Yeah.
In an After Dark episode recently, Jeff Kanata described how he hated the fact that Superman Returns was about Superman having a kid. So
Yeah.
that's what that's about. But anyway, yeah.
I mean, this is a little different. Obviously, this is a lot of gymnastics to get to the fact that we have another character named T'Challa in this
Yeah.
universe who is
Yeah.
the heir to the Black Panther, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, I'm like, I kind of go, oh, I see what is being done here. That's kind of beautiful. We get in several years, maybe we will get to see this T'Challa grown up and inherit or fight alongside Shuri or something. Like, I think that's beautiful. It feels like a way to, because T'Challa is Black Panther in a lot of media, right? And the idea that you can have a new T'Challa who is in that line of succession, I think that's all good. You can't think about it too long, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's all clearly contorted to get to that end point, and it would never have been set up that way if they would never have done it if Chadwick Boseman was alive, right? So if you apply any logic to it all, it's like there's no universe where you'd be like, the safe place to have a kid, not in the super advanced safety culture with the force fields around it.
Well, there is this kind of remnant of this idea of like being part of the royal family is like very dangerous and oppressive, in any culture.
Yeah.
But that's not really well established in this universe.
Again,
right?
all of it strains, suspension of disbelief a bit, but you understand why. And I feel like, okay, it's a means to an end. Right. And I didn't have and I thought it was kind of the way it's played, the emotional beat of it. And that little adorable little boy, like talking about his name and her name and stuff. It's such a beautiful little scene. Like, I will suspend my disbelief and not think too hard on the logic of T'Challa's choice to like go have a baby somewhere else.
Yeah. I also honestly was legitimately confused when she goes to burn the funeral garments at the end. I was like, oh, this is for T'Challa, because I literally thought it was for her mom, like because her mom has also died in this movie. So I was like,
you do it a year later.
Yeah,
So that's what they were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it was just there's just a lot going on in this movie, I guess is kind of what I wanted to say. Now
There's
I
a
want
lot
to ask you
going
guys, I want to ask you guys this question of what was your interpretation of the end? Because I've read different interpretations. Like at the end, like they're about to have the whole Black Panther ceremony, and then Winston Duke's character M'Baku shows up. He's like, I challenge for Black Panther. And then Shuri's in Haiti at that time. Like, we're meant to think that those things are happening contemporaneously. And then there's a new T'Challa. So it's like, what is the future of the royal family in Wakanda? I read one interpretation that's like Shuri kind of knew that M'Baku would do that and was like, I'm ceding this ground to M'Baku and like passing it on to M'Baku. And another one that's like, oh, she didn't know. And like now there's going to be a conflict between the two of them. And then possibly this third character of young T'Challa.
Yeah,
You know, like
that didn't seem deceptive in any way. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I guess I'm curious. Like, what was your?
Yeah.
Was it like
He was purely like a mentor in this movie because he was the one talking her down, from doing
you're
all of them.
M'Baku? You're talking about, right?
M'Baku, yeah. So if Shuri does not seem like somebody who wants to sit on a throne all day.
Right.
She wants to be out in the field. She wants to be in her lab doing work.
Yeah.
Like I can totally imagine being like, just deal with this stuff, please. Like M'Baku, you've been a leader for a while. People clearly listen to you and respect you. So to me, that's how
your
I read that.
interpretation is like she was aware and was cool with M'Baku
Yeah.
doing the stuff he did at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff,
Yeah.
is that your interpretation as well?
Yes, I think it is an open question intentionally, and I think that it is part of what is setting up for whatever third film this. Obviously there is this notion of whether Namor is just biding his time and is going to attack them again, and so I think there are a lot of intentionally open threads, and I think that is one of them. Is what is the future of the Black Panther character?
Mm-hmm. Also, I want to see some awkward dinners in the third movie. Just like, Namor, thanks for joining us. That's usually the Queen's seat. Please.
Yeah. Well, I do want to acknowledge, and by the way, we talked about the opening, but like, I thought it was really interesting the way this movie opened. Like, it opens with Shuri kind of trying to put together some molecules or whatever for some compound to help out T'Challa, and I thought that was
to make the heart shape.
It was really interesting. Yeah, it was really interesting opening because first of all, not all Marvel films have a cold open at all.
Yeah, it just throws you in there.
It just throws you in,
most
and it's
don't.
like it shows she's like kind of it's her like frantically trying to figure out a solution, and I just thought it was a really interesting way to open the movie.
Did you guys have the normal? I don't know if you went to a normal screening. I know you did, Dave. Did you have the normal amount of trailers and stuff in front of it too?
Yes, it did.
Okay, because in my theater, it almost felt like they played like one trailer and just like went straight into this movie.
It's a really like they just throw you right in, which is really interesting. And I mean, look at the end of the day, I do want to say, we usually end each of these reviews by saying, at the end of the day, it's really impressive that someone like Ryan Coogler made a movie, and it is really impressive. But like, I can't imagine how hard it must have been to make this movie. You know, like the central protagonist of the movie has passed away.
This also happened to Rise of the Skywalker, by the way, too. So
yeah. You're dealing
idea.
Yeah, you're dealing with the grief of that. Like, imagine like a close friend has passed away. Then you need to like do work while that's happening. And then like rewrite the entire thing to make it all make sense and be emotionally satisfied. So
and also fit into the machinery of the MCU coming to like you have to redo all that work. So
it's an almost impossible task, basically. And so it's not surprising to me that like that there have been challenges. Now some of the stuff feels like unrelated to Chadwick Boseman's passing. Like, do we needed to see Julia Louis-Dreyfus in this movie? Like, I don't think that's really.
Do we need to know she was married to Martin Freeman's character?
That was the whole reason they were in this movie, right?
Yeah.
But putting that aside, I really do think it is impressive that they were able to make this movie because I can't imagine how difficult it must have been.
Absolutely.
And with I think the expectations for the first one too, it's so anyway,
and you talked in the main review, Dave, about what could have been, the way they could have gone, and I think it's impressive too that Feige and whoever the decision makers at Disney are allowed the entire structure of the Marvel universe to sort of acknowledge the passing of one guy. It's like I think that's a credit to how important Boseman was to people, to like the film going audience. And I think it's to their credit that they didn't behave like a big, $1 billion behemoth, monolithic or what am I trying to say? A big corporation. They didn't behave like a corporation. They behave like human beings. And I think that's all too rare. And it's, I think you got to give them credit.
Absolutely. One thing I want to mention before we wrap, they say a word in this movie. Namor calls himself a mutant.
I know.
Every time they do this, I'm like, God damn it. I'm like,
that was not a mistake.
Get on with it. Get on with it.
That was not a coincidence. That was not a mistake.
Yeah. To go, good call out, Devindra. I'm glad you mentioned that. But
I have my ears perked from that. Okay. I want more.
Your ears are pointed to the sky.
Yeah. I do also just want to say, like, I think, to follow on Jeff's point, I think the movie was trying to say something about like how Queen Ramonda and Shuri
Mhm.
and like Namor. I think like my understanding is they're supposed to represent like different ideas or concepts of grief, as kind
Mhm.
of or
Mhm.
different stages of grief,
Yeah.
different
Right,
ways of
Yeah.
right,
dealing
right.
with grief.
Right.
And I get that that's what the movie's trying to do. I don't think it fully landed for me just because it was trying to do so much stuff, right? Like,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
as you said, Jeff, I think you put it well. Like, there's so many interesting things in the movie, and that's one of them. The idea that like here are three different characters who are dealing with grief in different ways, but it all just gets kind of lost in a muddle for me, unfortunately, like
Mhm.
thematically.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a movie where like I'm so impressed at the effort. I did love
Yeah.
the movie. This is probably not a movie I'm going to revisit again. But I'm so impressed
I
at the
mean,
effort that they were able to pull this off at all
Yeah.
that I can't help but admire it and recommend that you see it. Go ahead,
I
Jeff.
agree. And you guys have both compared it to Iron Man 2 and Thor 2, and I think it's far superior to either of those.
Absolutely. It is a better
sophomore
movie. It
efforts.
just feels like it has the same
I understand
creakiness.
comparing it
Mhm.
to a second film difficulties, but I think it is far more watchable and more interesting and has more to do and more to say than either of those movies.
All right. Well, at the end of the day, it's really impressive that Ryan Coogler made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.